Our next guest on Off the Podium is a man who really needs little introduction, but I'll give him a bit of an introduction. Four-time Olympian, two-time Olympic medalist, three-time World Championship medalist, member of the Australian Hall of Fame and the Queensland Hall of Fame, the Sporting Hall of Fame, that is. Also 10th on Dancing with the Stars, 20th on Australian Survivor, and 4th at the Australian Grand Prix Celebrity Challenge in 2005, and one of the founders of one of the best beers that are currently going around in Australia right now. It is an honour to welcome to Off the Podium, the one, the only, Steven Bradbury. Steve, first of all, pleasure to have you here on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. And you might have had one too many of my last man standing beers when you did those stats there, because I wasn't 20th on Survivor, I was 19th. Don't get that wrong, 19th.
Jeez, and I'm meant to be a Survivor expert as well. I think I just blew our chance to get you over on my Survivor podcast in a few years. Shit. All right. Those beers are that good, Steve, that it just kind of it blows with the head. So that kind of works. I want to start with the beer actually, because this is I tried it. You gave me some of your beers recently. We sort of worked together, obviously, with Channel 7. I got the Rona. And as part of being able to recover, I was able to drink some of your beers. So thanks very much for that. But how did this come about? The idea to get involved in starting a beer? Was this something that you'd always wanted to get involved in?
In a roundabout way, it was always meant to happen. And it's not the usual path for an Olympian to go into booze. I don't know any other Olympian who's ever done that. But for me, I've always done things, I suppose, a little bit unorthodox. Even my skating technique wasn't the prettiest to watch, but it was effective. With the beer, I started the business with a couple of mates. Their names are Stephen and Damien Prosser. And their dad used to play for the Wallabies back in the 70s. His name was Roy Prosser. He was big front row forward. After his Wallaby career, he became one of the head honchos at Carlton United Breweries, and him and I became mates through Olympic circles and sporting circles, and then I became mates with his sons as well. And we all toyed with the idea of one day maybe doing our own beer together. And we never did it. Big Roy passed away about 12 years ago now, and his sons and I kept that conversation going. And eventually we said, well, if we don't do this, we're going to die with regrets. We don't want to do that. We want to do it. So we like to think that, whilst we've created what I believe is the best lager ever brewed. I'm a little biased, but there's a little bit of Big Roy's memory in every can.
Fantastic. And the name itself, obviously, was that was pretty. Was that the easiest part to come up with when it came to putting this together?
It was. That was always going to be the name, but not easy to dance around the responsible drinking side of our branding, because being the last man standing, if you just look at it at face value, it says, okay, well, who can drink the most and stay standing up? But that's not what the concept at all is. We've got the hare and the tortoise on the logo. So it's a little bit take the piss out of myself and the way that I won the gold medal, but it's also around encouraging responsible drinking, because you don't want to be the hare, go too hard too early and make a pissed idiot of yourself. You've got to perfectly pace yourself and be the tortoise, so you can be the last one standing.
Great work there. And is it a bit of a process when it comes to putting together a beer and kind of when it comes to tasting recipes and kind of making sure that it's up to the standards of what you three want, and then branding? Like, how long does it take from the, okay, we're going to do this, to it's on the shelves, people can buy it?
It probably took a year.
Wow.
Of planning and trial and error, and first was to get the flavour of the beer exactly what we wanted, and then the whole marketing plan was done before we put any cans in cartons or anything like that. But it's trying to compete in the mainstream beer game, because we're an easy drinking lager that borders on a Pils that has a little bit more malt flavour in the aftertaste. So it's definitely not a craft beer. It's a beer that 9 out of 10 beer drinkers can get their head around. And, we're trying to compete on the mainstream beer market against the big brands that everyone's heard of in Australia. Your VB, your Carlton Draft, your Great Northern, your Forex. These big brands that are all now owned in Japan. No one's money stays in Australia. None of the beers, aside from Cooper's, are Australian owned anymore. And so we're trying to compete on a volume scale against these guys. And, it's probably the most competitive market imaginable. But, I think we can crack it. And if we can make a blip on the radar against these big guys, then Australian owned, hopefully on the back of COVID, becomes a little bit more important. And, if the big dream ever comes up, I'd like this beer to be the beer for the 2032 Brisbane Olympic Games.
That's a good goal. I like that. That really, really works that way. And have you found this, compared to your skating career, more challenging, as you're saying, like trying to get into the beer market, cracking the beer market, because it's obviously completely different from a sporting career, but in terms of how you're trying to market it and get a foothold in the competitive beer industry you're talking about?
Yeah, well, obviously you've got to be in hundreds, if not thousands of bottle shops, and you've got to be on tap in as many venues as you can to try and get that volume going for the beer, lots of people knowing about it. And a bigger part of the whole campaign for a beer is the marketing side of it, which you need a big budget to be able to do. And we're only just creeping into that space now. We've done it, in the first 2.5 years on word of mouth, the taste of the beer and telling everyone we know about it and trying to get people's lips around it and drink one and then tell their mates. But, if you look at what Great Northern's done, which is the number one selling beer in Australia now, in my opinion, not the best quality beer you could ever drink. But marketing campaign is amazing. And 75% of that game is getting your branding in front of people and they go, oh yeah, I'll give that beer a try, because it's very interpretive as to what you consider a good beer and what I consider a good beer could be completely different. And if you drink enough of one beer, even if you consider it bad, you're going to start to like it after a while.
It's kind of like this show, Steve. Eventually people listen to it long enough, they start to like it. It's like, as a Tasmanian, obviously, Southern Tasmanian, I'm all for Cascade, but then you got Bogues up north who just, we think, over-promote themselves because they're just crap, right? And so, so there is that there. And plus, I can imagine that those initial phases of tasting the beers, getting the recipes right, must be a pretty cool part of the job. I'm just going to work today to test some beer recipes today. I'll see you later on.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the attractions. And, obviously having a beer and watching sport and having a drink with your mates is all part of our branding. But, there's the hard work phase is certainly there now, where you got to go and visit bottle shops all the time and stand there and give people free samples every Friday afternoon, which I've done hundreds of times pre-COVID. And as of my business partners, and, some people get a bit of a shock when they see an Olympic gold medalist standing in their local bottle shop serving them a free sample of beer going, please buy this, please buy this. But everything starts from the ground floor, and that's what I did in my sporting career. I was a speed skater from Brisbane. Obviously, I didn't have many or any sponsors, and I did it the hard way. And, if we can continue to do those little steps for a long time with the new business, with the beer that I'm involved in now, then, I think that puts us in good stead with a good foundation underneath us to get there slowly but surely. And, who knows what happens at the end of the day. It could be a similar Aussie success story to when I won this thing 20 years ago.
There it is. Beautiful. Have you stolen that from the museum? You've taken it back. I was at the Hall of Fame Museum a couple of weeks back and I saw it there. That you finally said, no, I want it back now.
That might have been Elisa Camplin's one that's in there. That's in there in the museum. My skin suit's in there.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I do love it. Actually, it's funny. We had Kieran Hansen on a couple of years back, and he got the bronze out from Lillehammer. So it's kind of, we like it when it's sort of, it's there, ready to go, and kind of out to shot, because it's a big thing. We always like to find out what happens with the medal. But you're obviously mentioning sort of getting started in the sport, everything along those lines. A lot of talk recently has been the 20-year anniversary, of course, of the gold in Salt Lake, but 30-year anniversary, Steve, of your first Olympic appearance back in Albertville, which I think, do you find that with all the hoopla and all the excitement that came with the gold in Salt Lake, that a lot of the pre-Salt Lake story gets lost, because I've read your autobiography. It's one of the best autobiographies I've ever read, and all the story and everything in the lead up to Salt Lake and your career. I mean, part of the World Championship winning team, of course, in 1991 in the relay, ultimately part of the Lillehammer bronze in 1994 as well. But do you feel that so much of that story does, kind of all that success you had pre-Salt Lake, gets lost in your story because of how you won the gold in Salt Lake?
No, I think I disagree. I think the rest of my story would have been lost regardless of whether I'd won the gold anyway. And, you know, you mentioned that you had Kieran Hansen on this show, and I spoke to him after he told me about it. He's my best mate. And he said, I had this bloke who wanted me to do a podcast. I haven't had someone ask me to do a podcast to talk about my sporting career since about, 6 months after I retired. And, unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast. People don't remember silver and bronze medals. I mean, you're a big sports nut. Rewind the clock to Tokyo 6 months ago. Can you tell me a bronze medalist from our Olympic team, but not the Boomers?
I can tell you a couple. Kelsey Lee Barber, our javelin thrower, our decathlete. I've forgotten his name. So there's your point there. But there's definitely a few.
Well, you've done a lot better than most, because you're a sports nut. And you know a lot about
too much, Steve.
Pretty much every sport. But my point is that the bronze medal for Kieran and myself and the other guys in the team was amazing to win Australia's first Winter Olympic medal. But a couple of weeks later, the country had forgotten us.
It's fascinating, so fascinating, because I was 7 to, I don't know how that makes you feel, Steve, but I remember it vividly when that happened. And I wanted to sort of know, like, what that reaction was like when you got back home. But I mean, as you're saying, a bit forgotten about. But was there a bit of, here you are off the plane, Australia's first Winter Olympic medalist, and kind of a bit of attention there that helped boost anything within, say, you guys as a team and the sport? Or was, as you were saying, it was just kind of quickly forgotten about and it was just back to status quo before the Olympics?
No, it was a short-lived bit of media attention for the sport. We'd gone in as the favourites in the relay for Albertville and didn't work out. But in Lillehammer, getting Australia's first winter medal, we were on the front page of most of the newspapers in Australia the next day, and all the television cameras and radio shows wanted to have us on for a week or so. So, for us guys that had been, I suppose, training and competing in complete anonymity for most of our lives, to have people want to know a little bit about our story was gratifying. And, for me, after that, accolades of the bronze medal faded. I mean, I had another 8 years in anonymity before Salt Lake City and the gold medal that everybody remembers. And, from there, the whole world wanted to know my story at the end of something that had started 20 years earlier. So, as you mentioned, after you read my book, there's a fair bit of background in there.
Yeah, so much. And some of the things, like you've said too in other interviews, about how you didn't feel you skated at your best until Salt Lake. I mean, as I said, you had 3 Olympics before 2002. Obviously, Nagano was in between Lillehammer and Salt Lake. Going into that, considered a medal chance. I mean, what sort of do you remember from, say, Nagano, and kind of what happened there in terms of not skating your best and things like that? Kind of what sort of do you feel was about those Olympics that maybe wasn't up to your peak where you wanted to be?
Yeah, I mean, there's a list of things I could go through. In Lillehammer, I was one of the big favourites in the 1,000, and I got knocked over in the first round of the competition. The guy who knocked me down in the heats got disqualified, but that didn't help me. And Nagano, I still had realistic chances to win medals there in the 1,000, and I had glandular fever in the lead up. I had a knee injury in the lead up, blah blah blah. But it was a lot of trials and tribulations along that journey, and there's a lot of athletes that have trained incredibly hard for a long time in their sport and didn't get to achieve their goals. And for me, that's how it was up until Salt Lake. 3 Olympic campaigns and not having skated my best was driving me crazy. And in Salt Lake, at my 4th Olympics, my best wasn't what it used to be. There was 6 to 8 guys in the world that even on my best day, I couldn't beat anymore. and 4 of those guys were on the ice in the final against me in Salt Lake City. And, I had a bit of experience and judgment under my belt by that point. So having skated my best in the quarterfinals, that was where I achieved my goals in that Olympics. And, from there on in, I had a hell of a lot of luck.
And was that motivation that spurred you on? Say after every single one of those Olympics, it was getting you to Salt Lake, because as you were saying, you hadn't felt you had achieved your best, and that's what helped you go to a 4th Olympics?
Yeah, there was definitely unfinished business, and probably the defining moment came down to, was 18 months before I got the gold medal. I had a crash in training out at Acacia Ridge. I went headfirst into the barrier and I broke my neck.
Ouch.
Picture of me there with the halo brace screwed into my skull.
Yeah.
And I had 2.5 months in that thing, and I had that whole time to think about what I'd already done in my sporting career and what I still had ahead. And in thinking about big picture during those 2.5 months, it said to me, well, if you finish up now, and the doctor who screwed that into my head, he told me I'd never skate again. I just went to another doctor because in my head, I had no choice. I only had 16 months of hard work to go after that thing was off my head. 16 months out of 14 years is only a little bit on the end. So in my head, if I didn't do it, have one last crack at the Olympics, then I'd regret it for the rest of my life. So I didn't have a choice.
It's incredible.
It's the only thing that I became elite or an expert at briefly here or there. I wasn't exceptional in anything else. And, that's the case with most athletes. You kind of put all your eggs into one basket. And, in the quarterfinal in Salt Lake City is where I put those demons to rest. I skated the best that I could as the oldest skater in the entire Olympic field. And that was the moment sitting in the change room where I'd realised that goal was, for me, that was the highlight of my life.
And it was part of that too, not only recovering from that injury and having that motivation, but was there maybe a lack of pressure on yourself that you felt less of that, say, had in Nagano, Lillehammer, that, people looked at you in Lillehammer and Nagano as a potential medal favourite, and then maybe in Salt Lake, they weren't necessarily focused on you as much as they were back then because you were sort of more at the twilight of your career as you were, say, 4 years prior?
Yeah, 100%. I was flying under the radar, being a speed skater from Brisbane. I flew under the radar a lot of the time, even when I was arguably the best in the world. But, coming into Salt Lake, the top guys in the world weren't looking at me or studying my form and race tactics because they had other skaters that they were more concerned about. And, as I mentioned, it was about getting to that 4th Olympics for myself to skate my best in front of the whole world, because there's not too many spectators at Ice World at Acacia Ridge at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday, and so for me, getting to finish my skating career with 16,500 people in the stadiums and, on such an Olympic high was the carrot to train that last 16 months after I'd broken my neck, because prior to that, there was a lot of doubts in my head as to whether I still wanted it enough, because I knew that medals weren't going to be realistic in Salt Lake City. And until I'd broken my neck, I wasn't sure that going to a 4th Olympics and just doing my best was enough for me. There was questions as to whether I just should stop now. Why should I go to a 4th Olympics? I don't need another Olympic team tracksuit. I've got plenty of them. But, in the end, it came down to, well, firstly, being a bit of a stubborn prick, but secondly, having to finish what I started. And, there's probably a little bit of that first-time Olympians in Tokyo or Beijing didn't get to see their sport with a heaving, packed stadium like I got to do in Salt Lake City. And whilst on the television, the no crowd factor didn't play into the spectacle of it that much, there's definitely some adrenaline and buzz from within the stadium that you get when you walk into the Olympic Stadium that's packed to the rafters with the crowd that some of those athletes didn't get to experience, which, that's that's a big part of the buzz when you're there and you're in it on that particular night.
Yeah, and I mean, as you said, 16,000. I'm sure 15,998 of them were all going for Apollo Ono, of course, that
They
night.
were.
We spoke to Apollo a couple of weeks before Beijing, and what I loved about sort of when we brought up the race is that he's obviously still to this day, he does motivational speaking and all that kind of things. And if he's got Australians in his events, basically he's always got at least one who comes up like, oh, do you remember that race back? The Australian guy won it. And he's like, yeah, no, I probably remember it more than you do. I was the guy who got second. I mean, do you still sort of have a chat with Apollo every now and then and kind of, reminisce, or, was it sort of the short tracks, fraternity a bit close like that, where you do sort of stay in touch with people like that over the years?
It depends who it is and where they're from. The Chinese and the Korean guys, not so much, but they don't speak much English anyway, so it makes it tricky. But, I've caught up with Apollo here or there over the years, and, it's been 20 years since I retired, and, 10 since he retired now as well. But, last time I hit him up was, we've got the Bradbury movie, which has been stalled over the last 2 years through COVID, but the script has been written, and we're potentially going to get Apollo to play himself.
Nice. Well, he's done acting before, of course. We talked to him about his little role in a movie about giant Tasmanian devils that took over Tasmania, and we had a few questions about that.
Really?
So
I haven't seen that movie. What's that called?
It's I think it's just called Tasmanian Devil. I'll send you a link. It's interesting. Yeah, I'm not too sure about the factualities of Tasmanian Devils there. But hey, look, now that he's got acting ability, then you're sold.
I saw him on an episode of Hawaii Five-0, I think it was, one of the new versions, and he hosted some B-grade game show in the US for a while as well, where his game show host skills probably could have used a little bit of work, but he wasn't too bad.
Well, I mean, maybe though you could get the Dancing with the Stars tips. He won Dancing with the Stars, so
yeah. Well, yeah. Whereas I finished last. A bit different.
Kind of poignant there, I think, Steve. Obviously with the Golden Salt, like, I mean, the story's been told. So many sort of interesting facts about it. Is there anything about that race or anything around Salt Lake that maybe you feel doesn't get told enough, or is there a particular story sort of around the gold that, perhaps that hasn't really been shared a lot that maybe you want to talk about today?
Well, you mentioned the 16,000 people in the stadium, and when I crossed the line, they were all booing. And if you replay the race, you can kind of hear it in the background through the effects mic. And, most of the 16,000 people were booing because Apollo Ono was in the pile-up, and, he was pumped up in the American media to get the gold. And, they weren't booing at me, but it was a strange feeling to cross the finish line at the Olympics and have the entire place booing at you. And, for me, I celebrated for a couple of seconds in my head, and then I was waiting for the official judge's decision. And yeah, there was an American guy in the crowd who was like right at the front row, and I was over at the edge of the barrier, and he said, "Bradbury, you should stop smiling. You don't deserve shit." And
wow.
I just glared at him and gave him the finger. Fortunately, they didn't catch that on the television. But yeah, it was an interesting few minutes there while the judges were huddled together to make their official decision.
That's crazy. That would have been one of those things that in today's world probably would have made it, and you would have been viral, like a meme or something like that on Twitter with the finger, like, got gold, fuck you all. Like, that would have just gone that way probably. That would have been interesting. I went to Salt Lake and I saw a Jazz game a few years ago, and like, basketball, great, absolutely love basketball, but I was more like, hey, this is Bradbury Arena here. This is where history was made. I'm looking at the rafters of all, like, the championship banners and the Hall of Fame. I'm like, where's the Bradbury one? We want the Bradbury thing hung from the rafters. I think you need to contact them. You need to contact them basically in Salt Lake at the arena there to be like, hey, where's my honor in this stadium?
Yeah, well, the Jumbotron they call it there, which is the huge big screen that sits above the basketball court. Well, was the ice rink when I was there. But, when the gold medal came up on it, huge with my name next to it, when the official result came through from the announcement of the result from the judges, then for me that was the moment where I knew that it was real, and I'd already gotten off the ice by that point. The other skaters had gotten off, and I wasn't going to do a victory lap if they announced me the winner, which I thought they were going to do. And when it happened, I just sort of looked up, and there was a couple of seconds there where some of the people in the crowd cheered. Not many. Most of them were still booing because Ono didn't win. But I couldn't hear it. There was a couple of seconds there where it all just went silent in my head, and they felt like that they were my few seconds.
Yeah, perfect. And of course, hearing that national anthem, first time ever at a Winter Olympics, fantastic. We just saw in Beijing, Charles Hamlin was 37 when he won a gold medal in what supposedly, and his last Olympics, he said it now for the last couple, you could have easily gone on for 2 more, gone to Vancouver there. Steve, was there any temptation for you to go on post Salt Lake for a couple more?
Not a chance. Probably the thing that's given athletes so much more longevity, or there's more than one thing, is recovery techniques. Things like ice baths, massage, injury prevention, video analysis, and a big one that's come into, most sports nowadays is money. Mm-hmm. And a lot of athletes continue on, and they haven't really crippled their body as badly as what athletes did in my day because of all the recovery techniques after training, and all those things cost money as well. So I think they're the reasons why athletes do or can go on a lot longer than what they used to.
Do you think Charles has got one more in him? Do you believe him when he says this is his last Olympics? He's been saying that since Sochi, hasn't he?
Yeah. Well, yeah. There was a guy that I used to race against, Mark Gagnon, and he was 4-time world champion in short track. And for me, he was probably, I used to see him as the greatest of all time in the sport. But I sent Charles Hamlin a message the other day, and I said, well, I think it's you now, mate.
Nice.
Because to get a gold medal at his age in a sport where the lactic acid tolerance that you have to maintain isn't for somebody in their 30s at all, let alone 37. And for him to finish with another gold medal in the relay is, in my head, probably sees him as the greatest of all time now.
Incredible. And then he gets tweeted by Lewis Hamilton. So, I mean, kind of keeps going well for Charles. Keeps popping up there. Now, Steve, before we let you go, one thing I want to quickly bring up. I brought this up to you when we were in Melbourne. I want to see if you've maybe had time to think about it. We had Kieran Perkins on the show last year, and I brought up him this idea. You mentioned Brisbane 2032, that Kieran comes in to light the torch, and then all of a sudden he falls over, and you come in and light the cauldron for 2032. Now, obviously, not a Winter Olympics because it's a Summer Olympics, although technically it's in winter because it will be in there. I mean, are you on board with this? Can we get the backing here, Steve, that we can push this? You and Kieran team up. We can push the AOC, the Kathy moment, lighting the cauldron, because I think this would be just the best way to light the cauldron in 10 years' time in Brisbane. Come on.
Well, I'm pretty sure Kieran Perkins wouldn't have agreed with you on that, would he?
he had a laugh of it. He said he's like, no, I can have a chat with Steve. So he seemed on board. So maybe it's just the pressure of being on air. And then as soon as we go off, he's like, Ben, that's a shit idea. Don't ever talk to me again. But hey, we've got it on the record, so I'll take it.
Yeah, well, there's a chance that Kieran might throw his hat in the ring to be the head of the organising committee for Brisbane 2032. I imagine he'd be one of the front runners for that spot. And obviously he's got a lot of business experience under his belt, and his athletic experience is pretty obvious. But we're in for a pretty exciting decade ahead here in Brisbane in the lead up to 2032. So it's pretty cool having the Olympics come to your town.
Yeah, and I mean, again, technically a Winter Olympics, Steve. So we could technically get short track maybe in the summer program. Just possibly, just talk to some people. I don't know. It's sort of possible there. Before we let you go, plug the beer. Where can people find out more information on it? Plug yourself on social media. Anything that you want to sort of get people to get drawn to so they can stay up to date with what you got going on?
There's a website for the beer there, lmsbrewing.com, .com.au, whatever you want to put in there. And we've got a beer locator on our website there that'll show you where you can get it. But
great.
We're in every Dan Murphy's between Cairns and Coffs Harbour. So if you're listening and you live in any of those spots, go and grab go and grab a six-pack for the last man standing. It should be $20 or just under $20, about 18. And we're on tap in a lot of places too, but have a look at lmsbrewing.com.au for where you can get it. And, well, mainly my skill set over the last 15 years or so, Ben, is doing corporate motivation and entertainment, a bit of stand-up comedy thrown in. And I've been a bit quiet on that front over the last 2 years because when COVID hit, it just went... So, if anyone wants to check me out and book me for their event, I'm at stevenbradbury.com.au.
Perfect.
And you can have a squiz at that and, be nice for things to get back to normal again real soon.
Got some good jokes probably planned for the 2 years worth there that you've just been working on, ready to go, firing out in all cylinders.
Well, I don't do stand-up comedy, but I'm pretty good at standing up.
Yep. That is the best way to end the interview. Steve, it has been a pleasure to chat with you, mate. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing the beer dominate the world and everything else in between.
Thanks, Ben. See you, mate.